What happens when the ultimate weapon of American geopolitical leverage, control over global energy chokepoints, suddenly backfires? Welcome to the Mercer Global Brief. I am Daniel Mercer. For exactly 40 days, the Strait of Hormuz has been a geopolitical black hole. But as the dust settles, a chilling consensus is quietly sweeping through the corridors of Washington and the newsrooms of London. The crisis designed to isolate America's adversaries is actually writing the obituary of American hegemony in Asia. Are we witnessing the moment the American eagle inadvertently crowned the Eastern dragon? The Strait of Hormuz has been locked down for 40 agonizing days. Every 24 hours, 21 million barrels of oil are supposed to pass through that narrow stretch of water. That is 20% of the world's daily petroleum consumption held hostage. Let us rewind the clock to 1980. The Carter Doctrine explicitly declared that the United States would use absolute military force to keep the Persian Gulf open and defend the free flow of oil. Fast forward to today, and that once terrifying doctrine has become a hollow echo. The American eagle is watching the chaos unfold, and its loyal allies are the ones bleeding out. For the past decade, Western think tanks and politicians have been aggressively warning developing nations across Asia and Africa about the profound dangers of deepening their ties with Beijing. We have all heard the endless talking points about debt traps, coercive diplomacy, and hidden costs that will allegedly push these nations to the brink of financial ruin. But a funny thing happens when a theoretical academic debate meets a brutal geopolitical reality. When the Hormuz choke point was abruptly sealed and a true global energy crisis erupted, the countries betting entirely on the American security umbrella found themselves suffocating in the dark. Their economies are practically flatlining. Meanwhile, the nations that chose to plug themselves into the Chinese infrastructure matrix and its massive green energy supply chain are demonstrating an absolutely shocking level of economic resilience. The global energy market is a fragile circulatory system, and the Strait of Hormuz is its jugular vein. When that vein is violently compressed, the American-led open trade order immediately suffers a fatal heart attack, while the Chinese alternative acts as a decentralized pacemaker, keeping the industrial pulse alive. America spent decades building a global fortress of economic sanctions, only to realize we accidentally locked ourselves outside while handing the master keys to Beijing. Let us look at a textbook example of this geopolitical paradox. Take Pakistan by all traditional economic metrics. This is a nation that should be experiencing total systemic collapse right now. Historically, Pakistan has been trapped in a vicious cycle, holding over $100 billion in external debt and staring down a perpetually expanding current account deficit. Just a few years ago, when the conflict in Eastern Europe sent global energy prices skyrocketing, Pakistan went into a financial cardiac arrest. Their foreign exchange reserves plummeted to a terrifying $3 billion, barely enough to cover 3 weeks of essential imports. The government was forced to crawl back to the International Monetary Fund for its 23rd historical bailout, swallowing punishing austerity measures and stripping away basic subsidies just to keep the government afloat. The result was absolute domestic misery, characterized by 18-hour daily blackouts and desperate citizens rioting in the darkened streets. When the Strait of Hormuz was blocked 40 days ago, Washington and London naturally assumed Islamabad would be the first domino to fall. After all, this is a country that historically imported nearly all of its oil and liquefied natural gas through that exact maritime artery. But the expected apocalypse never arrived. Yes, there are still some natural gas shortages, and yes, the grid is experiencing 2 to 3 hours of planned load shedding a day. But compared to the apocalyptic scenarios of the recent past, the nation is operating with a shocking level of stability. What changed? The answer is quietly generating power on the rooftops of millions of homes. Pakistan has been aggressively mass installing Chinese-manufactured solar panels. In 2024 alone, Pakistan imported a staggering 17 gigawatts of photovoltaic capacity from China. To put that into perspective, that is the equivalent energy output of roughly 17 standard nuclear reactors physically deployed across a developing nation in a matter of months. Today, a remarkable 41% of Pakistani households have installed their own solar panels for independent power generation. They bypass the geopolitical vulnerability of fossil fuels entirely. The traditional global financial system offered Pakistan the economic equivalent of an iron lung with endless debt strings attached. China, on the other hand, simply sold them millions of decentralized silicon shields. The harsh geopolitical reality of the 21st century is this: you can blockade a shipping lane and you can sanction a pipeline, but no empire on earth can embargo the sun. Let us move higher up the map, away from the coastal ports and into the shadow of the Himalayas. Consider the landlocked nation of Nepal. Historically speaking, geography is destiny, and for Nepal, that destiny meant a brutal, expensive reliance on diesel and petrol trucked up treacherous mountain passes from India. When the Strait of Hormuz effectively shut down, traditional economic models predicted that a geographically isolated nation like Nepal would be financially crushed by the skyrocketing transportation costs alone. And indeed, look right across the border at India. The Indian economy is currently experiencing a historic hemorrhage. With global crude prices exploding, Indian filling stations have become scenes of absolute despair, driving catastrophic inflation across the entire subcontinent and wiping out the savings of the middle class. But cross the border into Kathmandu, and you witness a reality that breaks every Western economic model. You do not see panic, you see quiet streets filled with electric vehicles. You might be shocked to learn that this small Himalayan nation currently boasts an electric vehicle adoption rate, second only to Norway on the global stage. And what exactly is powering this silent, electrified fleet? It is not imported Middle Eastern oil. It is a massive, sprawling network of newly commissioned hydroelectric dams, heavily financed, designed, and engineered by Chinese infrastructure initiatives. For years, the Global South was lectured by Western capitals that Chinese infrastructure projects were dangerous vanity traps. But when the ultimate geopolitical storm hit, those Chinese-built dams became an impenetrable shield. The traditional fossil fuel supply chain is an invisible leash held by Washington, and the Gulf states pull it tight during a crisis, and a developing nation immediately chokes. Nepal chose to cut the leash by systematically coupling affordable Chinese electric vehicles with local, Chinese-financed hydropower. They successfully built a new energy moat, completely insulating their domestic economy from the madness of American geopolitics. They stopped relying on the unpredictable, violent lottery of global crude oil, and instead, they bet their national survival on the eternal certainty of gravity and water. Now, let us turn our attention to the true victims of this geopolitical tragedy. I am talking about the ideological foot soldiers. Over the last few years, we watched a parade of nations blindly follow Washington into the trenches of a massive trade war. They eagerly slapped tariffs on Chinese solar panels, they banned affordable wind turbines, and they proudly declared they were de-risking their supply chains from Beijing. They locked the world's most cost-effective green technology out of their borders, all to prove their loyalty to an American empire that promised to protect them. But loyalty, as they are now discovering in the dark, is an incredibly poor substitute for electricity. When the Hormuz choke point slammed shut, these nations did not just walk into an energy crisis, they dove headfirst into an abyss of their own making. Without cheap, decentralized Chinese solar grids to fall back on, they remained entirely dependent on imported fossil fuels. And here is the brutal, often ignored reality of modern economics that nobody in Washington likes to talk about. Natural gas is not merely burned for power. It is the fundamental raw material for synthetic ammonia, which forms the absolute bedrock of global fertilizer production. When natural gas supplies choked off 40 days ago, the fertilizer plants across Europe and allied Asian nations immediately began shutting down. Now, these loyal allies are facing a terrifying, multi-tiered cascade of failures. They have no oil to run their logistics networks, no gas to power their heavy industries, and critically, no fertilizer to guarantee their agricultural yields. By weaponizing trade, America handed its allies a heavy boomerang forged out of economic sanctions. They threw it at Beijing, hoping to cripple the Chinese green energy sector, but the violent winds of this Middle Eastern conflict have sent that boomerang flying right back to shatter their own industrial backbone. They are discovering the hard way that geopolitical purity is an incredibly expensive luxury garment, one that offers absolutely zero warmth in the middle of a brutal winter. At the end of the day, You cannot negotiate with physics, and you cannot heat a freezing home with an alliance treaty. Now, let us examine the profound psychological shift happening within the Western media establishment. The very institutions that spent years cheerleading American exceptionalism are experiencing a brutal, undeniable epiphany. Just weeks before this crisis escalated, a remarkable consensus began solidifying across outlets like Bloomberg and The Guardian. They are looking at the geopolitical ledger and realizing a terrifying truth. The unpredictable, tariff-obsessed policies of the recent American administration, policies explicitly designed to crush Beijing, have inadvertently become the greatest catalyst for Chinese expansion in modern history. The Guardian bluntly stated that if anyone is making a nation great again, it is Washington making China great. By launching a chaotic, uncoordinated trade war, America blindly handed over the long-term leadership of the future. Electric vehicles, lithium batteries, and solar technology, the crucial new three pillars of the 21st century economy, directly to Beijing. And the economic data is absolutely damning. While American farmers watched their soybeans rot in the fields and allied industries choked on sudden supply chain disruptions, China quietly logged a record-shattering $1.2 trillion global trade surplus. The world is watching, and the fundamental math of global trust is changing. Recent comprehensive polling from the European Council on Foreign Relations reveals a seismic shift in global perception. Across 21 nations, representing over 26,000 respondents, traditional American allies are actively distancing themselves from Washington. They are driven by an evaporating fear of Beijing and a growing terror of American instability. The American geopolitical strategy has become a chaotic casino where the house always loses. In our desperate attempt to contain the Eastern Dragon, we simply built it a much larger, much more resilient economic cage, and then we absent-mindedly handed them the key. As the dust finally begins to settle over the Strait of Hormuz, the world is left grappling with a stark, uncomfortable realization. This 40-day crisis was never merely about crude oil, maritime insurance rates, or even regional geopolitics. It was a brutal, uncompromising global stress test on the very concept of empire. For over half a century, the American proposition to the world was simple and absolute: accept our financial architecture, follow our ideological rules, and our military hegemony will keep the dark at bay. But when the metaphorical and literal lights actually went out, it was not the terrifying silhouette of nuclear-powered aircraft carriers that kept the hospitals running in Islamabad or the logistics moving in Kathmandu. It was the silent, unglamorous, and decentralized hum of Chinese solar panels and hydroelectric dams. We are standing at the precipice of a new era, ladies and gentlemen. The grand chessboard of the 21st century will not be won by the nation that ruthlessly controls the geopolitical choke points. It will be inherited by the civilization that quietly builds the bypasses. When future historians look back at these 40 days, will they record it as a temporary supply chain glitch, or will they mark it as the exact moment the pendulum of human destiny definitively swung from the west to the east? What do you think? Are we witnessing a brief, recoverable stumble of the American giant, or the irreversible dawn of a new, multipolar century? Drop your geopolitical analysis in the comments below. I want to hear your theories, and if you want to understand the hidden currents shaping our world before they hit the mainstream headlines, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. I am Daniel Mercer, and this has been the Global Brief.